Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we're going to take a deep dive into the Hindutva network operating at the heart of the US Congress, which does help explain why, for the first time ever, America's own religious freedom watchdog has recommended sanctioning the RSS itself. And hundreds of Sikhs breach police barricades and disable water cannons marching on Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann's residence over in Punjab, demanding freedom for Waris Punjab Day leader and sitting MP by Amriptal Singh. We've got video footage of that to come up. And we'll take a look at a new exhibition in Kensington Palace here in the UK, telling the story of Dalits Singh, Queen Victoria's goddaughter, would you believe, a suffragette and a daughter of the last Sikh Maharaja, stripped of Punjab as a boy of 10. And we'll look at the numbers behind Punjab's Dalit paradox, the largest Dalit population of any state in India, and still no real power to show for it. It's interesting stuff. And an update on the campaign to bring Dumbarton's Jagtar Singh Johal home from Scotland, of course, as MPs and peers here in the UK pile pressure on the new Foreign Secretary. All this and more on today's show, and of course loads of your comments at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for those. Right, as I say, as usual, loads to get through. Great to see you guys joining me today. Of course, we're not live today. We'll be back live on Monday, but it's great to know that you guys are there watching. So anyway, let's get underway. And I want to start today with really the story I think that is the most sort of relevant and most important as we speak, because it does go to the heart of something that we do return to again and again on the show. It is the Hindutva movement, and particularly its claws, its tentacles that have infiltrated the US political machinery. Because, of course, it doesn't just operate inside India, as we well know. It has spent decades quietly building influence inside the very institutions of Western democracy. And, of course, nowhere is that any clearer than in the United States Congress of all places, which is quite shocking, it has to be said. And for years, independent South Asia researcher Peter Friedrich, this guy who we do mention quite regularly, he's actually been one of the very few journalists doing this unglamorous, granular work of tracing exactly how that influence operates, who's funding it, who's platforming it, and which elected officials keep showing up in the room. And his latest reporting turns to a guy called Congressman Sri Tanada of Michigan in a series called Representing Them. I'll just show you a quick video. What I'm showing up on screen now, for those of you who have watched previous shows, you might recognise this as being part of that huge project that was undertaken jointly by the Caravan online magazine and a French university called Sciences Po. And they have mapped this huge global network of the RSS and all its affiliations around the world. It's an astonishing piece of work and research. But more astonishing is actually just that huge extent. And this is just a snapshot. This is just a screenshot of just part of that huge network that, of course, has its core nucleus being the RSS back in India, and it literally stretches into just about every corner of the planet. It's actually quite concerning. But anyway, I want to show you, this is Peter Friedrich in one of his latest videos.
House Resolution 69, and it's aimed at people like me, at journalists, at researchers, at the academics who study a movement called Hindutva, and the network that carries it here into the United States. 3 members of Congress are the engine behind it. Sri Tanadar, who wrote it, Suha Subramaniam, and Raja Krishnamurti, who co-sponsored it. I have called them Capitol Hill's Hindutva Squad, and they've earned the name. The same network funded all 3 of their campaigns. Krishnamurti has shared stages with the senior leadership of India's Hindu nationalist movement. Tanadar personally escorted Narendra Modi, a man banned from this country for over a decade over an anti-Muslim pogrom, to his address to Congress. These aren't...
And I'll let that play in the background. So, yeah, he's of course talking about Congressman Sri Tanada of Michigan in this series. And Tanada has built a domestic reputation as a fairly ordinary progressive Democrat. But Peter's reporting lays out in Tanada's own public record a pattern that looks very different once you actually follow it. Repeated appearances at events tied to the Overseas Friends of the BJP, registered with the US Department of Justice as a foreign agent of Modi's party, and the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America. That is the US arm of an organisation the Congressional Research Service has directly linked to that 2002 Gujarat violence, which of course is one of the reasons that Modi himself was actually banned from the United States, just to put that into context. He was not allowed a visa into the United States for his involvement in massacres that took place back in 2002 in Gujarat. Now, the pattern that Peter describes, it's not unique to Tanada. He's part of what Friedrich has actually previously called, quite bluntly, Capitol Hill's Hindutva squad, as you heard in that video. And he names this guy Tanada alongside Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois and California State Senator Aruna Subramanian, among others who move fluidly between mainstream American political life and Sangh Parivar-linked platforms, RSS-linked, obviously. And Krishnamurthy, for instance, has spoken at events tied to the VHPA on multiple occasions. And his campaign has drawn substantial funding from donors connected to Sangh-affiliated organisations. In other words, RSS-funded. And the mechanism that Peter describes is completely consistent. American politicians present themselves domestically as champions of pluralism and minority rights, but lending legitimacy abroad to a movement that persecutes India's actual religious minorities, the Muslims, Christians, and of course, yes, the Sikh community, the RSS. And what makes this particular moment significant is that Washington's own institutions are starting to catch up to what Peter and others have been documenting for years, including ourselves. Back in March, a few months ago, the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, a bipartisan federal body, and we talked a lot about USCIRF, made a recommendation it's never made before in its history, that the American government consider sanctioning the RSS itself. So the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the Hindu nationalist paramilitary organisation that sits at the root of this entire network. Now, again, it's not just some sort of fringe advocacy group making that call. It's an official US government commission. And again, I refer you back to the shows that I've talked and covered about their recommendations. It is not, as I say, it's not just some small lobbying group on the outside. This is one of the core commissions in the US government that has recommended sanctioning the RSS for its activities. So it is actually worth being quite precise about what this network actually is, because it's designed to look diffuse and harmless. And let me go back to this sort of screenshot. The Overseas Friends of the BJP, it's a group, the Overseas Friends official sort of organisation. It's the American wing of Modi's own party. And the VHP of America runs the advocacy operations that lobby Congress directly on the BJP's behalf. So beneath those sit dozens of smaller other cultural, religious and community organisations, Hindu student associations, temple boards, unity and harmony initiatives that Peter and people like ourselves argue function as what's called the soft entry points. They're so hidden. They operate through stealth to push this agenda. And this is literally things like yoga classes, Hindi language nights, interfaith dinners, the kind of thing that look entirely benign and community related to a local school board or library service. They look completely innocent, innocuous. But until you then trace who's actually organising and funding it. Because of course, that old phrase, follow the money, you understand the agenda. And, I've covered many examples of exactly this pattern before on Perspectives on this show. We talked about a Maryland Public Library event some time ago. A California City Council quietly rescinding an official proclamation. Loads of those have happened. Again, I've covered those. These are small, they're very local, and, individually, they're very forgettable. They almost pass unnoticed. Except you put them all together, as Peter has done, as I do on a regular basis, and they all add up to a very well-coordinated, well-funded, well-resourced effort to normalise Hindutva and to normalise it as simply a Hindu-American community life in the eyes of ordinary Americans and ordinary American institutions. So Peter's other recent reporting does add a bit of a sharper edge to all this as well. In an open letter that he published last month, he documented how Congressman Ro Khanna, who once publicly rejected Hindutva outright, and whose own private correspondence with Peter showed he understood exactly what it was, has since co-sponsored a House resolution condemning something called Hinduphobia. This is obviously a term the resolution never deliberately actually defines. So the point that particularly Peter Friedrich, and indeed myself, make is not subtle. Leaving the term undefined, leaving the term Hinduphobia undefined, is deliberate. It is the point, because it lets any criticism of Hindutva as a political ideology be then recast as bigotry against Hindus as a religious community. It's a little bit like the Islamophobia argument we've got raging here in the UK. It's deliberately ill-defined or vaguely defined, so it can be used and weaponised to define any criticism as bigotry, as racism. It creates victimhood for Hindus, behind which they can hide. And this is precisely the sleight of hand that this movement of Hindutva has relied on for years, conflating some sort of supremacist political project with an entire faith. So that anyone who challenges the RSS Hindutva ideology gets accused then of attacking Hindus, the whole Hindu faith. That's how it works. And for you guys, particularly in the US, this is not some sort of distant story about Indian politics playing out somewhere else. This actually is about which of your own elected representatives in the US, in Congress, in state legislatures, even at city council level, they're all showing up at events organised by people the US government's own commission now says may warrant sanctions. So it's about campaign contributions traceable to RSS donors, sitting in the accounts of politicians that you voted for. That's why it's important that we raise these things. And it actually, interestingly, bizarrely also connects to something else worth flagging. Back in India, and again what we've talked about a lot about over the last few days, the All India Cockroach Party, that's the youth movement behind the protests, the NEET exam leak protests, posted publicly that the BJP is now investing even more heavily in their IT cells again to flood their social channels and drown out, obviously, the youngsters, the Gen Z movement, asking supporters to volunteer as comment moderators just to try and keep on top of this, to try and identify IT cell infiltration. It's the same organisation, it's the same playbook, just on two different continents. It's an army of coordinated trolls, representatives, agents, flooding Indian social media to control the domestic narrative, but a quieter, better dressed version of that same machine working the halls of US Congress to control the narrative there too. It is the same Sang Parivar, it is the same RSS, but just wearing different clothes depending on the audience. So this is why they're all connected. It's all part of that same machine, that same network. And the CIRF, the USCIRF, the United States Commission on International Religious Affairs, their recommendation about the RSS to sanction it, to ban them from visiting the United States, doesn't actually, sadly, guarantee anything will happen, because recommendations from that commission are not binding upon the State Department, and previous ones have actually been ignored before, sadly. But, and there is a big but here, it does mean that the argument that Peter Friedrich has been making, and us have been making for years, that this is coordinated foreign political interference in the United States. It's not just simply diaspora community organising, but it now has an official US government body saying essentially the same thing as us. It aligns with us. I wouldn't be presumptuous to say they're now aligning with us. We've all sort of got there to the same conclusion together. It is worth watching very closely where it does obviously go from here, because that trend line from USCIRF, this year was the first year they've actually recommended sanctions against the RSS. They've never done that before. They've been critical in the past, but of course you can start to see the direction of the travel. What happens next year in next year's commission? That's a big question. But there is a broader lesson here that is actually worth drawing out, because it's easy to treat each individual instance, whether it's a congressman's speaking engagement, a state senator's public statements, a library event cancellation, all those individual sort of things. It is very easy to treat those individual instances as isolated, almost doesn't matter local stories. Peter Friedrich's body of work that he's done himself, and it's still chatting away though, just to remind you. So Peter's work, and his huge efforts that he's made, and he's built it up patiently over more than a decade, I have to say, of unglamorous reporting. He's really been out there. It's really an argument against treating any of all this in isolation. And he first began documenting this in earnest after being personally threatened on US soil for his reporting on Hindutva. But he's kept at it ever since through hunger strikes, open letters, a small mountain of open source research that frankly most journalists simply don't have the patience or the specialist knowledge to do so. He's written books. He's literally seems to have dedicated his life to his cause. It's really, again, he doesn't align, as far as we're aware, with the Khalistan movement, but you certainly got to give him credit for the efforts that he's made in combating Hindutva. Because what his Capitol Hill's Hindutva squad reporting sort of story that he's actually talking about here, what it demonstrates, when you actually read the underlying record that he's citing, rather than taking anyone's word for it, is that all these overlaps, with stuff like this, they're not accidental. They're a consistent, traceable pattern of association funding and public advocacy that spans multiple states in America, both major American political parties, and of course all the way back across the world. Because Hindutva's operations across the world, and especially in the United States, are designed to be deliberately bipartisan by design. It deliberately courts all parties. Here in the UK, both Conservatives and Labour. In the United States, it is both Republicans and Democrats. And it courts them, it seduces them with equal enthusiasm, because its actual goal has nothing to do with our local politics in our countries, in America, here in the UK, Canada, wherever. It's nothing to do with that domestic left-right usual political divide. The goal is very simply to ensure that no significant political policy in America, in Canada, in the UK, in Australia, New Zealand, wherever, it's designed to ensure that it has an incentive to never criticise Modi's government or the ideology behind it, the RSS ideology. And that's why, really precisely why the USCIRF recommendation matters as much as it does, and why, of course, we're going to keep following that and hoping the trend line does continue to next year's Commission report and pushes it even harder. A Commission recommendation is not policy, but it is actually for the first time an acknowledgement from inside the US government, inside their own governmental architecture, that the pattern that we have been talking about, the pattern that Peter Friedrich has documented, is traceable. It is serious enough that officials with security clearances and subpoena power are now looking at the same material that we're talking about. So that's why it matters, and that's why it's so significant. So I want to now move on to Waris Punjab Day. And there's been a lot going on actually over recent days in Punjab. And it does stay with the same theme of who gets to hold power to account. Because really this is what it's all about. Holding our leaders to account. And I'm going to show you a video. Let me just quickly call up this video. Waris Punjab Day. Here you go. Right. Hundreds. This is video coverage of hundreds of Sikhs taking part in a Waris Punjab Day demonstration. I think it happened yesterday. They bypassed police barricades and disabled water cannons. I mean, we can see them climbing on there. Well done, guys. That takes, guts and courage. But of course, infused in Sikh in Sikh genes the guts and courage to take on the water cannons. It is basically, it's an attempt to march directly to the residence of Chief Minister of Punjab, Bhagwant Mann. Now, the demand on behalf of these demonstrators there, you can see them all there. Just look at the flags, wonderful sort of, they're not specifically Khalistan flags, they are, but they bear the colours of Khalistan. Obviously, they've got to be very careful what they display in public, India not being a democracy and all that. But the demands of these guys actually was very simple. And it's one that we obviously returned to many times. It was the release of India's Sikh political prisoners, the Bandi Singhs, who continue to be held for years, in some cases decades, years after completing their original sentences. It's an absolute outrage in terms of legality and the rule of law. And so at the centre of this action is, of course, the case of Amriptal Singh. He's the Warriors Punjab Day leader and, of course, a prominent Khalistan advocate who has been arbitrarily imprisoned over in Dibrugarh jail in Assam since 2023. And what makes his case particularly stark is what's happened since his arrest. He, of course, as we well know, he stood for election from behind bars and he won. And didn't just win, he won by an unprecedented majority. I think it was nearly 200,000. And he's now a sitting elected member of the Lok Sabha in the Indian legislature, imprisoned by the very state whose parliament he's been elected to sit in. And it's difficult to construct a clearer illustration of the contradiction at the heart of how India treats Sikh political dissent. Simultaneously legitimate enough to be elected by the people of Punjab, and yet dangerous enough to then be kept behind bars, essentially illegally. You know, look at that paradox. We talk about weaponising the law and how India cannot claim itself to be a democracy when it arbitrarily imprisons one of its political opponents, one of the government's political opponents. And he's far from alone, as we well know. Dozens of other Sikh activists remain arbitrarily imprisoned across India on similar grounds, including a name that we're very familiar with, particularly UK audience, is Jagtar Singh Johal. He's that Scotsman who's now been held for more than 8 years on 8 current charges, arbitrarily detained. And I'll just give a brief update on that in a moment. Anyway, but today's scene, these scenes in Punjab, outside Bhagwant Mann's residence, matter because of what they represent, not actually just what they've achieved on the day. Warriors Punjab Day, and I do like to talk a lot about Warriors Punjab Day because I think they hold the political key to the future of Punjab. But it is their ability to mobilise hundreds of people to physically confront police barricades and disable water cannons. That's huge. It's not just to stage a symbolic contained protest. It does signal an organisation that still retains real grassroots capacity to mobilise, even when its most prominent leader sits behind bars thousands of miles away on the other side of India. And that is precisely the outcome that the Indian state strategy of arbitrary long-term detention is designed to prevent. Remove the leadership, cut off the head of the snake, as they will call it, and the movement then is supposed to lose its momentum. Well, really? Look what's happening in these pictures. These pictures prove that calculation just is not working the way that New Delhi would like. Sorry, Mr. Modi, but you can try and cut the leadership off. You can imprison the leadership, but you cannot contain the ideology. You cannot contain the motivation behind his election to the Lok Sabha. And it's also worth putting this demonstration in the context of what Warriors Punjab Day actually is. And for you guys who might not be fully aware of Warriors Punjab Day, I'm sure you are if you're a regular viewer of the show, but Warriors Punjab Day, to give its full title, I think it's Shiromani Akali Dal Warriors Punjab Day. They emerged as a prominent voice on Sikh rights and Punjab's autonomy over very recent years. It's a very new movement, but explicitly framing its work around that whole Khalistan cause. And its rapid rise, then culminating in Amritpal Singh's election to Parliament from inside prison, has made it one of the most closely watched political forces to come out of Punjab in probably a generation. And the Indian state's response, arbitrary detention, rather than just simple open political discourse contest is itself a kind of admission from central government about how seriously Delhi takes this movement and, of course, its massive support base on the ground. They really are too afraid to acknowledge it publicly, so they've done what they've done, which is imprisoned by Amriptal Singh. But it essentially proves the point of how seriously they are taking Amritpal Singh's grassroots support. And it is a lesson, really, to you guys in India, particularly you guys in Punjab, when you start to feel alone. You know, you watch this show, hopefully you do get a sense of actually you're not alone. But the message really is, as these pictures are proving, of course you're not alone. The rise of Warriors Punjab Day itself is just one small piece of evidence amongst many others that I often, have to supply to you guys to keep reminding you you're not alone. That the movement for Khalistan is massive. It is not this fringe movement that Modi's government are perpetually trying to sort of tell the world. The flooding social media, the flooding even mainstream media, that they're a bunch of terrorists, they're extremists, they're a fringe movement. Really? Well, just look at what happened in the last elections. Warriors Punjab Day, 2 elected members of the Lok Sabha standing on a pro-Khalistan ticket, both elected with unprecedentedly large majorities in a normal democratic election. In other words, the support for Khalistan, the support for Sikh sovereignty, even just the basic support for increased human rights for the Sikh community is massive. It is enormous. And the next election, assuming we will have another election, but we will, hopefully, every election is, I have no doubt, going to be following this same trend line. Look at the support, the grassroots support, in this one single protest. This is just, don't forget, the majority of people don't join protests. They'll align and support them, but they don't join them for whatever reasons. They might be at work that day, or they just can't geographically get there, or they're committed elsewhere. It is very usual that protests are symbolic. It doesn't matter how many people are there, but it is quite likely and usually that millions of people support protests. They just can't physically be there. So the amount of support in this protest is in itself just a snapshot of the massive support that Warriors Punjab Day clearly has across the whole of Punjab, and arguably other parts of India too. It is quite likely that what they are fighting for, what they represent, will resonate right across India. I've no doubt that the Tamils, who themselves have their own secession sentiment, feelings, they will align certainly with Warriors Punjab Day because they're essentially fighting for the same thing. And likewise in other parts, in Manipur, obviously in J&K, who've been denied a referendum despite being ordered by the United Nations decades ago, J&K would probably align with the whole philosophy of Warriors Punjab Day because that reflects their own desire to break away from India. So again, this is why I think Warriors Punjab Day is a key to the future of India. And when I say the key to the future of India, the key to the future of what happens to India, that is a very different thing actually. In other words, that fragmentation, the balkanization of India. Because once democracy takes control, and it will do because it always does, once the people take control, you can't stop it. You cannot stop the many because those in India, those ruling elite are the few. And once people realise, once they get to that tipping point of 3.5% of the population taking to the streets, then, as they say, all bets are off. Now let's move on. And I want to talk about, this is an interesting one. It's also, let me go. It's it's a very different story. It's quite a sad story as well. And it involves a lot of introspection as a British person. There's a lot of introspection. That means looking back on myself and certainly my culture and my history. I don't take responsibility for it, but I can certainly look back at it. It is a very different setting. This is Kensington Palace in London, here in the UK, in London. It is actually, I have to say, a remarkable new exhibition that's telling a story that sits right at the intersection of actually a lot of things that we talk about and actually care about. Colonial injustice, Sikh royal history. And it involves a Punjabi princess who, as it claims, refused to know her place, indeed. So, yeah, it's an exhibition called The Last Princesses of Punjab, and it opened earlier this year at Kensington Palace, one of our royal palaces here in London. And it marks what would have been the 150th birthday of Princess Sophia Duleep Singh. And if you look at that photo, I think she is bottom left. I think that bottom left there, I'm circling it. That's Princess Sophia Duleep Singh. And this exhibition, it runs up until November, the 8th of November in London. If you're in London, if you're in the UK, do go visit this exhibition. It'd be interesting to see it. But it is, what I want to talk about is really understanding exactly who Sophia was, because her story, it's not any sort of minor footnote in history. It is actually the British Empire's colonial project against the Sikh kingdom of Punjab, personified into one single family. And it is actually a deeply sad story. Sophia was the daughter of Maharaja Duleep Singh. And of course, Maharaja Duleep Singh, he was the last ruler of the Sikh Empire. He was the son of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the great leader by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And Duleep Singh, he was a young lad. He was forced to surrender his lands and, of course, the Kohinoor diamond to the East India Company at the fall, the annexation of the Sikh Empire in 1849. And young Duleep, he was just 10 years old. He was just a young lad. Of course, he didn't know what he was doing. He was in the hands of others making decisions. But he was that symbolic head of the Sikh Empire when it sadly fell to the British. And he was effectively, in 1849, then exiled to Britain. And he was raised under the Crown's supervision. Essentially, he became, bizarrely actually, the godson of Queen Victoria herself. Queen Victoria, the royal family, essentially took charge, legally speaking, of young Duleep. And Queen Victoria, on the British throne at the time, she then, as I say, bizarrely became godmother to Duleep's own daughter, Sophia. And again, you've got to sort of try and get your head around the dynamics of this. The monarch, whose empire had just dismantled the Sikh kingdom, then personally sponsored the christening, in Christianity, of the deposed Maharaja's child. And that contradiction runs through this entire exhibition. Now, Sophia herself grew up with a huge amount of privilege and royal proximity. She was obviously brought up within the royal household, essentially, or the extensions of the royal household. And she became one of the more unlikely figures, actually, of the British suffragette movement. The suffragette movement, for those who might not understand it, that is the movement about women's rights. So actually, when you think back to the Sikh Empire and how the Sikh Empire treated women as equals, which in fact the British did not at the time. Let's not forget this. So again, Sophia, bless her, she brought her Sikh principles into her very life, even back here in Great Britain. And in 1913, she stood outside Hampton Court Palace, that's a literal royal residence, selling copies of the Suffragette newspaper, which is highly, provocative, illegal essentially at the time. It was an act of defiance, dressed quite deliberately in the suffragette colours of purple, white and green. And she then marched on Parliament as part of the 1910 Black Friday demonstrations. So she used her royal status and public visibility, her public platform, precisely because it made her impossible for the press and the political establishment to ignore. Now, the suffragette movement at the time was very controversial. It was almost made illegal because all it was doing was, and it sounds outrageous today to say this, but because they were standing up for women's rights, at the time in Britain, it was seen as outrageous. Women? Rights? Give women the vote? Don't be ridiculous. For those of you who like British humour, there is one fabulously comic sketch, and I wonder if I can post up the link. But if you Google, I'll come back to it. There's a Harry Enfield sketch about women know your rights, and it beautifully personifies the social treatment of women. Even this is, I think, the sketch was back in the 1930s. But you imagine, go back another 30 years, the time of Sophia, women were treated as second-class citizens. They were treated as pretty things, to adorn men's arms. They had no rights. Their opinions were irrelevant. That is how the British treated women. Contrast that to the Sikh Empire. 50 years, 100 years earlier, how the Sikh Empire treated women, totally differently. But anyway, I'm going down a diversion there. But for those of you who want to see how women were treated, look out that Harry Enfield sketch. It's satire. It's beautiful satire. I'm just chuckling about it now because it's a classic. Anyway, it's got millions of views, so you'll see it. Anyway, this exhibition, it doesn't stop with Sophia. It also tells the story of her grandmother, a lady called Maharani Jind Kaur. She was the last reigning regent of the Great Sikh Empire, and she herself was imprisoned by the British and finally exiled after refusing to be quietly sidelined. And of course, there's a direct thread from Jind Kaur's imprisonment for resisting British control of Punjab through to Sophia's then eventual arrest and confrontation with that same establishment 2 generations later over a completely different cause, of course, and a deeply significant cause to Sikh philosophy, the cause of women's rights. And actually, bizarrely, even through to the Bandi Singhs that we discussed a moment ago, still imprisoned by a different state for resisting a different iteration of the same basic demand, self-determination for Sikhs. Ultimately, you can see how this whole Sikh, I'm going to use the word victimhood, but Sikhs must never see themselves as victims. But ultimately, as an outside observer, I can say that Sikhs are victims. And they've been victims of empires, of the British Empire, the Indian Empire as it is today, this colonial control of both Britain and India. And it threaded through the lives of this family. And so anyway, this exhibition, it is a genuinely rich piece of history and it's well worth a visit. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see it myself. But if you are in London before November, do go have a look. And actually, if you go, send me some pictures, get in touch, put in a comment that you've been. I'd like to know what you think about this exhibition. Because it is a useful reminder that the fight for Punjab sovereignty, and of course the basic fight for political rights, they have deep tangled roots that long predate 1947, the partition, let alone even 1984. And when we talk about the Khalistan movement, and people say, it's a recent phenomenon, absolutely not. You only need to look at this family and the great Bhai Maharaja Ranjit Singh, what he stood for. The Khalistan movement's roots are traceable all the way back through this family. So, as I say, do get along to the exhibition if you can, and let me know what you think about it. I just want to, how are we doing for time? We're okay, actually. We're on time. I want to talk about Dalits. And Sikhs always stand up for the oppressed. And the Dalits, actually, and I do talk about Dalits, every now and again. We talked about Dalits in some of my podcasts with Dr. Growell, because they, of course, are the lowest caste. They sit at the bottom of that caste pyramid. They've had a terrible time in life. If you're born into the Dalit class, God help you, because your life is pretty awful. And again, it threads into Sikh ethos, the Sikh philosophy, all the way back through to the first Guru Nanak Dev Ji, that Sikhism was essentially established to protect the persecuted, to stand up for the oppressed, which is why the Dalit story actually is so relevant to the Sikh community. And again, I want us to try and frame this within the sort of the structures of Punjab as well. And I'm going to talk a lot about, and it's hard for me to talk about this because, of course, I'm not a Sikh and I'm obviously not a Punjabi, and I've not been brought up in Punjabi society. So I'm sort of looking at it from the outside in, based on my understandings of this. And it's really up to you guys to correct me if you think I'm wrong, or at least guide me. But I'm going to give you my sort of opinions on this, my perspectives, to use the name of the show. And because I do want to talk about a little bit, and I do talk about Punjabi politics to some extent, but I want to talk about Dalits in the context of all that. Now, Punjab, interestingly, I didn't know this, Punjab actually has the highest concentration of Dalits of any state in India, apparently 32%. According to the most recent data. And that, therefore, is not a small minority. That's a lot of people. Nearly a third of the population of Punjab are Dalits. But despite that numerical strength, of course, they've never, ever held power in Punjab. And of the state's 117 assembly seats, 34 are formally reserved for the community. And still, real political control has obviously remained firmly, apparently, in the hands of Jat Sikhs, who make up only around 20 to 22% of the population. Now, a lot of this problem stems back to, and I do refer again back to podcasts I've done with Dr. Grail, where we've talked about the Pune Pact and Dr. Ambedkar back in the 1940s and 50s. And the Pune Pact and this agreement, essentially, where the Dalits were sold out. They didn't realise it at the time, but it sounded on the face of it like a good deal, that they were allocated a certain number of set seats guaranteed in the political infrastructure of India. But in fact, what it did guarantee is that they had a voice, but they could never then be in charge. That was the ironical catastrophe of the Pune Pact. But anyway, of course, that imbalance, it does go well beyond the assembly chamber. Land ownership itself it tells its own story. And again, despite being a third of the population, give or take, Punjab's Dalit community holds a tiny fraction of land, particularly agricultural land, in a state whose entire economy and, of course, social structure is built essentially around land. And the Bahujan Samaj Party, that was founded specifically to organise and represent Dalits, the Dalit community, and actually, interestingly, notably, founded by a Punjabi, Kanshi Ram, back in 1984. It's never obviously managed to translate its founding vision into power in its home state. It's never broken into actual double-digit seats. It's never got into even 10% in the Punjab Assembly. And, for example, over in Uttar Pradesh, as a comparison, the same party has actually formed the state government 4 times over, despite Dalits actually over in that state making up even a smaller share of the population than they do in Punjab. So why the gap? Why is there how can we explain that disparity, for example, between Uttar Pradesh and Punjab? Well, analysts point to a genuine fragmentation problem. Punjab's Dalit population is divided into all sorts of distinct subcastes and religious communities. And in other words, it's not a simple answer. There are these subcastes, apparently Sikh Dalits, Hindu Dalits, Ravidasyas, Valmikis, Mazbis, Adamis. Now all those separate groups, subcastes, have historically not voted as a single block, unlike, for example, the Jat Sikh community, which is a much more unified political group. So every major party in Punjab obviously then courts the Dalit vote because it's so heavy, it's so important, there's so many of them. So they court the Dalit vote at election time, and the current Bhagwan Man cabinet, for what it's worth, does include 5 Dalit ministers out of 18, that's nearly 28%. So they really courted the Dalit vote. But of course, courting the Dalit vote at election time and then redistributing structural power are 2 very different things. In other words, they'll say the right things at election time, they'll get the Dalit vote at election times, make all sorts of promises, but when it comes to actual power, controlling power, well, unfortunately, history in Punjab suggests something very different. In other words, they never get positions of any power. And it's a useful story, actually, to hold in mind, alongside everything else that we've talked in today's show, because it's a reminder that the struggle for genuine self-determination in Punjab, the Khalistan movement, it's not just about a story about confronting Delhi. There are lots of nuances. If Khalistan is to happen, it's got to respect every human being's rights in that whole region. It's essentially, it's an unfinished conversation in Punjab itself about who actually gets to hold power once any sort of sovereignty or autonomy is achieved. And this is a question that the Khalistan movement is going to have to answer honestly, not just for Jat Sikhs, obviously, who are in charge, let's say, but of course for the nearly 1 in 3 Punjabis who are Dalits. It ventures into a pretty uncomfortable situation, because if you're a Jat Sikh, it's all right for you guys, but how strongly are you wedded to your Sikh values? Essentially, because, and again, when we talk about the Sikh Empire succeeded because it treated every single individual equally. There was obviously no caste system. So it is that uncomfortable question. A third of Punjab at the moment fall into the Dalit class. How is Khalistan going to treat those low, essentially today's lower caste Dalits? Is it going to treat them, in the same way that India does? Is it going to use all sorts of dirty tricks? Are the Jat Sikhs going to be genuinely following their Sikh philosophy? Will they give equal rights, equal opportunities for Dalits to get involved in the governance of Khalistan? I believe I know the answer, and I think the answer is yes. I think once Khalistan is established, once that governance model is in place, then the Dalit community, not just in Punjab, but right across India, will be invited to take part on an equal footing in the democratic governance of Khalistan. But it is really up to the Khalistan movement. If you want the numbers to support the whole movement, if you need that huge voting bloc to support the concept of Khalistan, you've got to ensure that your average Dalit, and whichever subcaste they fall into, that they are provided with that opportunity, that genuine promise that will be delivered, that they will be treated as equals. They can, to use the pun, cast aside their caste, that caste will no longer be relevant, that they will not be seen as inferior. Now, of course, every society has its classes, it's human nature, but ultimately they must be given the promise that they will have genuine, equal opportunity to take a genuine part in the governance of Khalistan. And that, I'm saying that as an outsider, and I'd be interested to you guys who are Sikhs, particularly Sikhs in Punjab, and those who obviously still have family back in Punjab, who have deep connection with Punjab. Let me know your thoughts on that, because it's a deeply uncomfortable question. Because, of course, when you're in the, let's say, the sort of the upper classes in society, I'm not talking about caste, but when you are in a more privileged position in a society, like clearly the Jat Sikhs are, it's very hard to then treat others who you see as inferior, to give them an equal opportunity, because essentially they're competing with you. So it takes a deep philosophical self-confidence to look at your Sikh faith and say absolutely, to follow the guidance of the gurus. And I'm being presumptuous here, but I have no doubt the gurus did instruct every Sikh, you've got to treat your fellow human beings as equal. That is what Langar is all about. Can you, as a Sikh, sit in Langar, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, with a Dalit, for example? Yes is the answer. I've seen it myself, effectively. But then outside the Gurdwara, will those same human beings have an equal opportunity in Khalistan to enter politics, to be elected to positions of genuine power? I think the answer to that is yes, and I hope it is yes. But I'm interested in your thoughts on that. As I say, I'm now delving into areas that I am not very deeply familiar with, but you guys are. I need your thoughts. So let me know on that. It's a fascinating discussion. Now, we're running out of time. I want to quickly just talk about Jaggi. It's just a quick update. There's nothing significant other than the reshuffle that we had in our British Parliament. Andy Burnham, our new unelected Prime Minister. We have a new Foreign Secretary, a guy called Ed Miliband. He's an absolute idiot, to be frank. I mean, don't get me started on our Labour government. They were so useless that they had to bring somebody from the outside to lead them. They couldn't find anybody within the Labour Party good enough to become our Prime Minister, to get rid of, to kick out Starmer, surrender Starmer. There's nobody in the party who was good enough to take over, so they had to go outside, find Andy Burnham, who himself is questionable in his competence, to bring him in, completely unelected, to the Prime Minister position. Anyway, but he's now elected a new Foreign Secretary, a guy called Ed Miliband, who himself is an absolute cretin. And I'm sorry to be so negative about the guy, but his track record politically is absolutely dire. The guy is a danger to modern society. Anyway, but he has now been elected as our new, he has been now appointed as our new Foreign Secretary. And unsurprisingly, the family of Jagtar Singh Johal, particularly his brother, Gurpreet, who's been battling for years, for over 8 years now, to lobby the British government to do something about Jaggy and his arbitrary detention. So we've got this new guy, Ed Miliband, now in charge. So the family are now obviously lobbying heavily Ed Miliband to see if he's actually going to do anything about Jagtar Singh Johal. And unfortunately, I can predict nothing. Nothing will happen. Ed Miliband is so useless, is so incompetent, that nothing is going to happen. And it's deeply sad to say that. But I know, God willing, in 6 months' time, I'll still, hopefully I'm still in this seat in 6 months' time. But if I am here in this seat in 6 months' time, I can predict I will be saying, 6 months in, there is no movement on Jagtar Singh Johal. Ed Miliband has failed. I bet he doesn't even address it. I bet he doesn't even say anything in public about him. I predict that because I know the Labour Party now. I know Ed Miliband. I know his track record. So I know what the story is going to be. And it's deeply sad to say this. But I dare Ed Miliband to prove me wrong. I hope to God he proves me wrong. Show us what you're made of then, Mr. Miliband, if you really think you're a successful politician. Deliver the results. Deliver Jagtar Singh Johal's freedom. Then I will eat my words and I will publicly apologise to you, absolutely wholeheartedly. And I will sing your praises from the rooftops. Anyway, right, let's move on. We've got 8 minutes to zip through our comments. Thank you guys, for all your contributions on the comment front. As always, you've been very active. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. Thank you for all your live comments on the live shows as well. I do actually review all those comments after the shows, just have a quick look through it. If there is anything worth sort of or that needs my response, I'll try obviously then bring them up in the comments here as well. So that's for the live comments when I do the live shows. Monday to Wednesday, the live shows, 5 p.m. UK time. It's great to see you guys who join me on that. If you can join from the US, I don't know if I've got anybody in the US watching because the time zone's a bit tricky. But anyway, it'd be great to have more overseas live watchers and commenters at the time. Anyway, Safety Muffins kicks us off today. This is, again, we're talking about Punjab and the concern about what's happening in Punjab. Excuse me. Safety Muffins says, in Punjab, when one person was in discussions with a migrant, presuming somebody come into Punjab, this person said, I will kill my son and I will blame you. And he said, well, why would you kill your own son? He said, because then we'll have no more problems. So again, not much detail, but essentially I think the point being made here is that it is showing the sorts of dangerous, dirty tricks that people, particularly Hindutva and RSS associated people, will sink to destroy Punjab, to take over Punjab and destroy it as a state. So it is, and there is a warning here, and I think there's a comment coming up as well, likewise. And Dr. Grewal himself has said, and obviously Dr. Grewal has huge connections with Punjab. He's warned. He said, I'm genuinely worried that something very bad is about to happen in Punjab. And I've talked on the show. There are lots and lots of red flags that are flying, warning flags saying something could happen very bad in Punjab in the foreseeable future. And Safety Muffins continues with the warning. If I'm not wrong, the coming 5 years will be very dangerous for Punjab, particularly obviously for Sikhs. Punjab will lose its water, soil, language, environment and its natives as well. And yeah, again, this warning is very timely and I think it is a very, very important, genuine warning. Because as I say, clearly the BJP, but by that read the RSS, the Brahmanical elite who are controlling and ruling India have always had it in for the Sikh community. But obviously they've had it in for Punjab, that sort of core of Sikh faith and identity and culture. And they know they're losing the battle against the Khalistan movement. So their efforts are increasingly desperate. And this is the fear, that the more desperate that the Brahmanical elite of India become, the more dangerous they're becoming, the more prepared they are to undertake more serious, more outrageous acts to try and reimpose control and retake the narrative. It worries me, it worries clearly many in the Sikh community, particularly some very high profile and very well educated, well connected individuals are very, very worried about what is happening in Punjab at the moment and what is about to happen. So we will keep an eye on that. Danny, with, I have to say, not a hugely unhelpful, hugely helpful comment, 16 million still live there. Well, yes, they do. It's not going to protect them. India's got 500,000 troops in J&K. They can easily switch them to Punjab and start imposing martial law or president rule, you name it. So that's the worry. TC, which party will genuinely support Sikh Panthic rights? That is the big question. The very easy answer to that. All parties will support Sikh Panthic rights when it suits them. But the key question there is genuinely. The answer is the only party I can think of, political party, is of course Warriors Punjab Day. That's why I actually dwell on them. That's why whenever their actions enter the news, it's worth talking about, because I think the only genuine party that genuinely supports Sikh Panthic rights in Punjab and across India is Warriors Punjab Day. That's my opinion. I'd be interested to know if there are other parties that you know of, because of course India has so many smaller parties, political parties that many of us never even heard of, and they sort of pop up above the parapet periodically. And India is quite often governed by coalitions because there are so many disparate political factions and parties that even the BJP, the ruling BJP, have to form coalitions to then govern. And that is the nature of Indian politics. So it's very hard to actually find a powerful political force that has enough support to create a powerful a political threat effectively to the BJP and Congress dominance of Indian politics. But I think Warriors Punjab Day regionally at the moment has a genuine chance of taking control of Punjabi politics. Across India, who knows? But if Warriors Punjab Day, the clue's in the title, Punjab, but ultimately, if Warriors Punjab Day does broaden its remit, politically speaking, it could easily spread across India. It could affiliate or corroborate, partner with parties in Tamil Nadu, in Kerala, Karnataka, in Manipur, the Seven Sister States, all those areas, the Dravidians, for example, or the Naxalites. Politically they're quite far apart, but it is not difficult for them to form coalitions, powerful coalitions with all the secessionist movements around India to then make a genuine impact, to then genuinely bring about potentially the breakup, the fragmentation of India. Who knows? We'll see. So, TC, I hope that sort of answers your question. Harjeet Rosha, greetings to you. You're a great guy who comes close to me. Just kidding. No, kid, I love it. I'm a human being. I love a compliment. We all love to be complimented. It keeps us going every day, so it's much appreciated. You showed that police guy armed with an AK-47, which was hilarious. Well, actually, it wasn't hilarious. It was actually really serious. And I'm chuckling now, but actually, it's serious. Somebody takes an AK-47 to a democratic protest. That's a very, very big, dangerous step. But of course, you then turn it into humorous by saying basically he was so scared that his mother said, "Look, you better go. When you're facing these dangerous, scary girls in the protest, you better arm yourself." In other words, you're not man enough to turn up to a protest unarmed. So I think, that sort of speaks volumes. I totally endorse the sentiment. Stay safe. It's quite used looking. AK-47. It's worn down. It has wire stock in the back. Actually, I haven't taken a look at that. Maybe it was an old AK-47. It doesn't matter. As long as it's got a firing pin, a breech and a barrel, it's still dangerous. So anyway, Danny, any country authority group that relies on such old weaponry is an absolute joke. Well, Danny, all I would say to you is that just about every revolution, every coup in the 20th century succeeded with an AK-47. So you can dismiss it as much as you like. The AK-47 has been it has been the most successful military assault weapon in history. I challenge you to find me an alternative to that. The AK-47, the Kalashnikov, designed by the Russian engineer Kalashnikov, has been an absolute extraordinary success, militarily speaking, because it works. It's simple. I've used one myself. I hate to say this word, it is a beautiful weapon from a purely ruthless military perspective as an ex-serving soldier. It is a beautiful weapon because it works. It is reliable. It works in deeply harsh environments. You can be in the desert with the dreadful sand, or you can be in the jungle in the mud and the wet. It works. That is why it is so successful, and it is simple. It's one of the easiest weapons to use and fire. It's deeply accurate. So it's not a joke, mate. I hate to say it, Danny, is that Regimes, armies have been defeated and overthrown by the simple use of the AK-47. So you can arm yourself with the latest Heckler and Kochs or whatever. All of them still fall beneath the power and the beauty, the beautiful simple design of the AK-47. You can start a revolution today with an AK-47. As much as you could, we'll say 100 years ago, I don't know when it was brought in, but certainly it was 1950s-ish, 60s, I don't know. But whenever the Kalashnikov arrived, it literally changed warfare globally. Sikh Jedi. The sweet smell of revolution, talking about revolutions and revolts. Almost brings it to mind. It's been a long time coming. It's a shame that Sikhs, at least the vocal minority, were standing on the wrong side of history. Oh, yeah. I think Sikh Jedi, you're, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're not aligned with the Khalistan movement. I think you are a Sikh, obviously. But your loyalties are, well, obviously to the Sikh community, but I think less so to the Khalistan movement, interestingly. Let me know what your actual politics are, if you wish to share them, of course. But it is, it's the Sikh community is divided, sadly. It's a shame that the whole Sikh community is not united. But that is humanity. We're all different. We all have different opinions. It's perfectly all right and normal for Sikhs to argue with each other. But it's better if we're all united in one common cause, which of course is Khalistan. So anyway, the Sikh Jedi, if you're not aligned with the Khalistan cause, I really hope somehow we can persuade you to join the great cause, because you will benefit just as much as anybody else. Oh, Danny's back with a Danny comment. Thank you, Danny, but I don't think there's much to say about that one. Sufton Muffins with the ice cream cones. As usual, thank you, Sufton Muffins, for your support. Stay safe. Absolutely. Please do share the show and Radio Punjabi. Two great channels. I guess Radio Punjabi is in Punjabi, so I can't watch it, so I can't say yes or no. But certainly, I can certainly hope that you guys do share Satellite TV. We do need to boost the numbers, particularly live. So mention it in the Gurdwaras. Mention it to your mates. We're here. We love talking about you guys. So it's a two-way street. You know, I need you guys. I can't do the show without you. And yeah, tell the world about us. And Akal, I can read the Punjabi. Akal 6334, great job, sir. Thank you, much appreciated. Again, TC, fantastic work, consistent, exemplary, high standard journalism. God bless you. And of course, Chardy Colour. We are all of us united in Chardy Colour. We're all working on this. It's not just me, as I often say. It is all of us, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, in Chardy Colour, making this work. Daljit Lit, there's a name I've not seen before in the comments. Hello, Daljit Lit. Thank you for joining us. Great job, much appreciated. And stay safe. Likewise, appreciates your comment as well. So thank you, Daljit Lit, and welcome to the show. Great intel on the show. Some standout news on Perspectives lately. Well, I'm only as good as the news. I mean, if there's no news, it's quite hard to sort of come up with stories to tell you about. We do have stronger news days, weaker news days. I don't have control of that. I am but the messenger, as they say. And Danny then says, which won't bring you a country. Well, because this show isn't here just to bring the country. It's to bring the truth. But there's the whole Khalistan movement, Danny, which clearly you are in total ignorance about. The Khalistan movement is very, very powerful. Interestingly, I do agree with your comment, is that many of our youth are distracted by eating McDonald's, going out, doing things they shouldn't be doing, etc. But it's up to us to change that. So in other words, it's indifference. And the distractions of modern life is one of our greatest enemies. You're right on that one. And Vahi Guruji, I think this commentary is. Thank you for the cross kirpans. A thumbs up. A Sat Sri Akal to you, sir. Assuming you are a Sir, of course. Final comment to the show. Thank you. Cam KZ, one of our regulars on the show, and indeed I think you popped into some of our live shares as well. Nice to see you on the live shares as well. Thank you for your Khalistan Zindabad. Indeed, that is the salutation that we do like to end every day's show on. Thank you to you guys. Thanks for all your support. Do keep the comments coming. I need your comments, obviously, to then talk about at the end of the show. And it's always great to have that bit of banter with you guys. So do keep the comments coming. On the live shows, I'll be back on Monday, obviously, at 5 p.m. UK time. Live at 5, as I say. And tomorrow, Friday, we've got the podcast with Dr. Greywell. That will be uploaded in the morning, so do keep an eye out for that. But that is it for another day. And indeed, another week of perspectives. Do watch the podcast show tomorrow. Do keep your comments coming. Do message me. Many of you have been doing. Thank you for your messages. Much appreciated. Message at satelagetv.com if you want to just have a chat with me. Say hello. I do get all your emails. I do read them. If I don't respond immediately, my apologies. It's just because obviously I'm rushing to get the show prepared every day. But I do like to receive your emails. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, knowing that you guys care. So anyway, that's it. That is it for another day, another show. Thanks so much for watching. Do keep your comments coming. Keep your links coming. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. And I will also see you live at 5 on Monday, God willing.